Hurricane Irma was an extremely powerful and catastrophic Cape Verde-type hurricane, the most intense observed in the Atlantic since Dean in 2007. It was also the most intense Atlantic hurricane to strike the United States since Katrina in 2005, and the first major hurricane to make landfall in the state of Florida since Wilma in 2005. The ninth named storm, fourth hurricane, and second major hurricane of the 2017 Atlantic hurricane season, Irma caused widespread and catastrophic damage throughout its long lifetime, particularly in parts of the northeastern Caribbean and the Florida Keys. Irma developed on August 30, 2017 near the Cape Verde Islands, from a tropical wave that had moved off the West African coast 3 days prior. Under favorable conditions, Irma rapidly intensified shortly after formation, becoming a Category 2 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale within a mere 24 hours. It became a Category 3 hurricane, and therefore a major hurricane, shortly afterward. However, the intensity fluctuated between Categories 2 and 3 for the next several days due to a series of eyewall replacement cycles. On September 4, Irma resumed intensifying, becoming a Category 5 hurricane by early the next day. On September 6, Irma reached its peak intensity with 185 miles per hour, 295 kilometers per hour, winds and a minimum pressure of 914 hectopascals, 27.0 inches of mercury, making it the strongest tropical cyclone worldwide so far in 2017. Another eyewall replacement cycle caused Irma to weaken back to a Category 4 hurricane, but the storm attained Category 5 status for a second time while making landfall in Cuba. After dropping to Category 3 intensity due to land interaction, the storm re-intensified to Category 4 as it crossed warm waters between Cuba and the Florida Keys before making landfall on Cudjoe Key with maximum sustained winds of 130 miles per hour, 215 kilometers per hour. Irma dropped back to Category 3 by the time it made a second Florida landfall on Marco Island. Irma weakened to a Category 2 hurricane later that day, the first time it weakened below major hurricane status in over a week, and eventually dissipated off the coast of New England. The storm caused catastrophic damage in Barbuda, St. Barthélemy, St. Martin, Anguilla and the Virgin Islands as a Category 5 hurricane. As of September 15, the hurricane has caused at least 82 deaths, including 43 in the Caribbean and 39 in the United States. The National Hurricane Center, NHC, began monitoring a tropical wave over Western Africa on August 26. This wave moved off the coast of the continent late on August 27. Throughout the next 2 days, showers and thunderstorms associated with the wave became better organized and gradually coalesced into a low-pressure area, as the system passed just south of and then through the Cape Verde Islands on August 29, with the NHC stating that any significant organization of the disturbance would result in the classification of a tropical depression. Further organization over the next 24 hours or so led to classification of the disturbance as Tropical Storm Irma, at 1500 hours UTC on August 30, based on scatterometer data and satellite estimates. With warm sea surface temperatures and low wind shear, strengthening was anticipated, with the only hindrance being slightly cooler waters and drier air. The nascent storm began developing upper-level poleward outflow as an anticyclone became established over the system, with banding features becoming increasingly evident in satellite images. Early on August 31, shortly after the development of a central dense overcast (CDO) and an eye feature, Irma rapidly intensified beginning at 9 o'clock UTC on August 31, with winds increasing from 70 miles per hour, 110 kilometers per hour, to 115 miles per hour, 185 kilometers per hour, in only 12 hours. On September 2, a ship passed 60 miles, 90 kilometers, to the west of the center of Irma, recording maximum winds of 45 miles per hour, 70 kilometers per hour, which indicated that the eye of Irma remained compact. A strengthening subtropical ridge over the central North Atlantic pushed Irma from a western to southwestern direction on September 2nd and 3rd. The first aircraft reconnaissance mission departed from Barbados on the afternoon of September 3rd, discovering a night 29 miles, 47 kilometers, in diameter and surface winds of 115 miles per hour, 185 kilometers per hour. On September 4th, after moving into more favorable conditions, Irma strengthened into a Category 4 hurricane. As it continued approaching the Leeward Islands, Irma underwent a second and more robust period of rapid intensification, becoming a Category 5 hurricane by 11:45 UTC the following day, with winds of 175 miles per hour, 280 kilometers per hour. As it began to take on annular characteristics, the extremely powerful hurricane continued to intensify, with maximum sustained winds peaking at 185 miles per hour, 295 kilometers per hour, near 0 o'clock UTC on September 6, which would remain steady and unchanged for the next 37 hours. 6 hours later, Irma made landfall along the northern coast of Barbuda at peak strength. 23. Later that day, around 2100 hours UTC, the pressure bottomed out at 914 hectopascals, 27.0 inches of mercury. This was the lowest in the Atlantic since Dean in 2007. While maintaining its intensity, Irma made successive landfalls at approximately 12 o'clock UTC on St. Martin and at 1700 hours UTC on Ginger Island and Tortola in the British Virgin Islands. Shortly before 6 o'clock UTC on September 8, Irma made landfall on the Bahamian island Little Inagua. About 3 hours later, Irma weakened into a Category 4 hurricane but regained Category 5 status 18 hours later before losing it again over Cuba. At 13:10 UTC on September 10, Irma made landfall in Cudjoe Key, Florida with maximum sustained winds of 130 miles per hour, 215 kilometers per hour, and a central pressure of 929 hectopascals, 27.4 inches of mercury. Later that day, at 1935 UTC, Irma made landfall in Marco Island with maximum sustained winds of 115 miles per hour, 185 kilometers per hour, and a central pressure of 940 hectopascals, 28 inches of mercury. The Marco Island Police Department recorded a wind gust of 130 miles per hour, 215 kilometers per hour. The Naples, Florida Municipal Airport measured wind gusts up to 142 miles per hour, 229 kilometers per hour. About a half an hour later, Irma made landfall in Naples at the same intensity. Irma weakened into a Category 2 Sunland, and below hurricane intensity at 12 o'clock UTC on September 11. At 3 a.m. UTC on September 12, Irma weakened to a depression over the Georgia-Alabama border and degenerated into a post-tropical low about 24 hours later north of Tupelo, Mississippi. Irma's remnants continued moving towards the northwest over the next day, before turning northward and then accelerating to the northeast on September 14. Early on September 15, Irma's remnants began moving off the New England coastline, and became increasingly disorganized, while continuing to weaken. Later on the same day, Irma's remnants merged with a cold front stretching over Newfoundland. Data collected by NASA showed ocean surface temperatures in the path of Irma were above 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees Fahrenheit, at the time, more than enough to sustain a Category 5 hurricane. Additionally, ocean surface temperatures in areas between Cuba and South Florida extended up to 32 degrees Celsius, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which was warm enough to intensify Irma into a much stronger 200 miles per hour, 320 kilometers per hour, storm, if ideal conditions had been met. Preparations. Caribbean. Given that Irma's forecast track was along much of the Caribbean island chain, hurricane warnings were issued for the northern Leeward Islands, Puerto Rico and parts of Hispaniola on September 5. On September 4, Puerto Rico declared a state of emergency. By September 6, the U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency had deployed response teams in Puerto Rico and the United States Virgin Islands. Supplies, including food rations, medical supplies, and blankets, were pre-staged in strategic locations on the islands for distribution. In Antigua and Barbuda, residents safeguarded their homes and cleaned up their properties in anticipation of strong winds. Emergency crews were put on standby at public shelters and hospitals by September 5 to assist with any evacuations. Expecting a direct hit, more than half of residents on Barbuda took shelter, and relief supplies were preemptively mobilized. In Guadeloupe, low-lying and cliff-edge homes were evacuated at the threat of flooding and erosion. Schools and public businesses closed on September 5 and 6. Hospitals stocked up on 3 days' worth of supplies and checked the functionality of their generators. Of the island's 32 municipalities, 22 activated their emergency plans. 1,500 people were urged to take shelter. The island sustained relatively minor damage and became the base for relief efforts on St. Martin, collectivity of St. Martin, and St. Bart's, St. Barthélemy. Though the core of the hurricane was expected to remain north of the island, a yellow alert was issued for Martinique due to the likelihood of rough seas. The island dispatched relief supplies and military reinforcements to its neighboring islands of Guadeloupe, St. Martin, and St. Barthélemy, who faced a greater risk of a direct impact. The National Emergency Management Organization on St. Lucia urged small craft operators and swimmers to be mindful of forecasts for high surf. Small craft warnings and high surf advisories were hoisted for Dominica, where residents were urged to remain vigilant of the potential for high waves, landslides, and flooding. In the Turks and Caicos, evacuation orders were issued for low-lying areas starting September 5. Schools were closed, government buildings were boarded up, and shelters were opened. Officials spread warnings to residents in English, Creole, and Spanish via social media, radio, SMS text, and WhatsApp. On September 5, the Dominican Republic activated the International Charter on Space and Major Disasters, thus providing for humanitarian satellite coverage. The United States and Haiti followed suit 2 days later. According to officials, 11,200 people were evacuated from vulnerable areas prior to the storm's arrival. 7,400 tourists were moved to Santo Domingo, away from beach resorts. In Haiti, government officials and aid organizations struggled with early preparation and evacuation efforts. While some officials blamed reluctance and indifference on the part of the population, others admitted they were not prepared for the onslaught and no mandatory evacuation orders were in place ahead of Irma's approach. Per The Guardian, local officials contended that they had not received promised funds, supplies, or equipment from the national government. The United Nations Stabilization Mission in Haiti prepared its 1,000 peacekeepers and engineers to assist. In the Bahamas, the government began preparations the week prior to the hurricane's arrival, including securing national sports facilities to use as shelters. By September 7, the government had evacuated 1,609 people by air from the southern islands, including 365 from Bimini. Controlled cutting of the power supply to southern and central Bahamian islands was conducted in advance of the storm. Shelters were made available, though usage was low due to most evacuees staying with family on other islands. Of the 2,679 foreign tourists still in the Bahamas on September 7, about 1,200 were being housed at Atlantis Paradise Island, one of the most hurricane-ready structures in the country. In Cuba, meteorologists did not initially predict a direct hit. Fuel conservation was enacted in Camagüey province to ensure that enough would be available during post-storm power outages. The civil defense evacuated nearly 1 million people from low-lying areas, including thousands of Canadian and European tourists in the Jardins del Rey. Dolphins at a Cayo Guillermo resort were evacuated by helicopter. Mainland United States. Florida. On September 4, Florida Governor Rick Scott declared a state of emergency for Florida, and placed 100 members of the Florida National Guard on duty to assist in preparations. All 7,000 troops are to be on duty by September 8. Officials advised residents to stock their hurricane kits. Governor Scott suspended tolls on all toll roads in Florida, including Florida's Turnpike, starting at 5 p.m. on September 5. All state offices in Florida were closed on September 8. All schools in the Florida Keys were ordered closed from September 6 until further notice. Mandatory evacuations for the islands were expected, with tourists to leave on September 6 and residents the following day. An estimated 25% of residents stayed. Schools and colleges were closed in 44 of the state's 67 counties, before Governor Scott ordered all state colleges, universities, schools, and offices to be closed from September 8 to 11. On September 6, the mayor of Fort Lauderdale ordered mandatory evacuations for all residents east of US 1. The city of Tampa, on the west coast of Florida, declared a local state of emergency. The University of Central Florida announced that classes would be canceled from September 7 to 12, and its Orlando campuses closed from September 8 to 11. Shelters were opened in the following counties: Broward, Flagler, Hardee, Hendry, Marion, Palm Beach, and Pasco, and Brevard. Brevard has 3 types of shelters: pet-friendly, general population, and special needs. While not every shelter opens for every emergency, there are currently 4 pet-friendly shelters, 11 general population shelters, and 5 special needs shelters which are not advertised. A special needs shelter provides more care and supervision than a general shelter to help meet your special needs during an evacuation. At around 1500 hours UTC on September 7, a hurricane watch was issued for parts of South Florida, from the Jupiter Inlet to Bonita Beach, including the Florida Keys. 79, at 2 o'clock UTC, Friday, September 8, a hurricane warning was issued for the Florida Keys, extending as far north as Miami. As of 0:51 UTC September 8, the governor ordered all public schools and colleges statewide to be closed Friday and Monday. Most commercial airports, including Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, Miami International Airport, and Orlando International Airport, ceased commercial operations by late Saturday. The storm surge was predicted at 10 to 15 feet at Florida's southern tip and above 9 feet along the west coast. For the 5th time in its 45-year history, the Walt Disney World Resort was completely closed due to the storm. Its theme parks, water parks, and Disney Springs were all closed by 9 p.m. on September 9. Due to Hurricane Irma, the parks did not open on September 10 or 11. Other Orlando area theme parks, including Universal Orlando Resort and SeaWorld Orlando, were also closed. Kennedy Space Center closed until September 13, and sustained the storm with minor damage. However, the Space Center is currently without water utilities. By the evening of September 8, hundreds of thousands of Floridians had evacuated, making it the largest evacuation in the state's history. Evacuees caused significant traffic congestion on northbound Interstate 95, Interstate 75, and Florida's Turnpike, exacerbated by the fact that the entire Florida peninsula was within the cone of uncertainty in the National Hurricane Center's forecast path in the days before the storm, so evacuees from both coasts headed north, as evacuees would not be safer by fleeing to the opposite coast. Fuel was in short supply throughout peninsular Florida during the week before Irma's arrival, especially along evacuation routes, leading to hours-long lines at fuel stations and even escorts of fuel trucks by the Florida Highway Patrol. Use of the left shoulder as a lane for moving traffic was allowed on northbound Interstate 75 from Wildwood to the Georgia state line, about 150 miles/250 km, beginning September 8 and on eastbound Interstate 4 from Tampa to State Road 429 near Celebration for a few hours on September 9. It was the first time that the shoulder use plan, which was introduced at the start of the 2017 hurricane season, was implemented by the state for hurricane evacuations. The shoulder use plan was implemented in place of labor and resource-intensive contraflow lane reversal, in which both sides of an interstate highway are used for one direction of traffic. Officials from the Environmental Protection Agency, which had been criticized for its response to Hurricane Harvey, took special measures to inspect and secure hazardous materials, especially at Superfund sites. Elsewhere, Georgia Governor Nathan Deal declared a state of emergency initially for all 6 coastal counties on September 6. However, the state of emergency was expanded to cover 30 counties in southeast and east-central Georgia, and Governor Deal ordered mandatory evacuations for all areas east of Interstate 95 on September 7. Contraflow lane reversal for Interstate 16 took effect on September 9 at 8 a.m. from Savannah to Dublin, Georgia. On September 8, Governor Deal further expanded the state of emergency to cover 94 counties south of the Atlanta metropolitan area, with mandatory evacuations expanded to include the entirety of Chatham County as well as low-lying areas west of I-95. 99. In total, 540,000 people on the Georgia coast were ordered to leave. On September 10, the state of emergency for Georgia was extended to cover the entire state, while Atlanta was placed under its first-ever tropical storm warning. All Georgia state parks are open for free to evacuees, as is the 800-acre camping area at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Reversible hot lanes on Interstate 75 in Georgia through South Metro Atlanta are open 24 hours northbound with no tolls. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper declared a state of emergency on September 6, with South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster following suit the same day. Governor of Virginia Terry McAuliffe declared a state of emergency on September 8 in order to protect Virginia residents and to mobilize resources in support of neighboring states. Officials in New Orleans stated that there would not be much time for preparations if Irma failed to make the projected northward turn, but that South Texas or Florida would not be a good evacuation destination. Talladega Superspeedway near Talladega, Alabama, opened their campgrounds to evacuees free of charge. On September 10, 2017, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam issued an executive order allowing medical professionals in other states to practice in Tennessee to aid Hurricane Irma evacuees. This order also allowed pharmacies to give out 14-day supplies of medicine and women and children the ability to participate in the Tennessee Department of Health programs. Sports. In professional sports, the Miami Dolphins-Tampa Bay Buccaneers game scheduled for September 10 at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami was postponed to November 19 due to the storm's threat. The Tampa Bay Rays and New York Yankees had their September 11-13 series moved from Tropicana Field in St. Petersburg to Citi Field, in Queens. Minor League Baseball's Florida State League, Carolina League, and Southern League called off their championship finals and as a result, named their division series winners league co-champions. Miami FC played a 3-3 tie with New York Cosmos on September 7 at home. Their fixture at San Francisco Deltas on September 10 was cancelled so the players and staff could prepare for the storm with their families. The Orlando Pride of the National Women's Soccer League rescheduled their September 9 match to September 7. Orlando City SC of Major League Soccer did not have any scheduled home games in September, but was unable to return to training in Orlando due to Hurricane Irma. In college football, the UCF Knights-Memphis Tigers game set to take place at 2000 hours EDT on September 9 was cancelled, after originally being moved up by 25.5 hours. The USF Bulls-Connecticut Huskies football game was also cancelled. The Miami Hurricanes Arkansas State Red Wolves game scheduled for September 9 at Centennial Bank Stadium in Arkansas was canceled due to travel concerns for the University of Miami. The Florida Gators Northern Colorado Bears match in Gainesville, originally scheduled for September 9, was canceled. The Florida State Seminoles contest against the Louisiana Monroe Warhawks was canceled on September 8. The Seminoles rivalry game with the Hurricanes in Tallahassee, originally scheduled for the following Saturday, September 16, was postponed 3 weeks later to October 7. The FIU Panthers game against the Alcorn State Braves was moved up a day and relocated to Legion Field in Birmingham, Alabama. The Georgia Southern Eagles game against the New Hampshire Wildcats on September 9 was also moved to Legion Field for that day. FEMA funding. As of September 5, FEMA funding was running dangerously low due to its response to Hurricane Harvey in Texas the previous week, prompting the Trump administration to request an immediate $8 billion in additional funding as Irma approached Florida. With the rate that current funds are being consumed at, the United States Senate almost doubled the requested amount to $15.3 billion, with the understanding that this would only be about 10% of what will be required for the response to Harvey.